Okay, let's talk about effects processing for vocals. This is a really misunderstood subject also, because if you remember at the beginning of this, I talked about everybody wants one box that does everything, and that's just not the way it works. And this is really especially true for different effects processing, and I'll explain why as we go. I want to talk first about reverbs, because a lot of people just want to throw their reverb on and have it sound like their favorite artist and big. But if you want to make a sound expensive, that's not what we do. We actually add really subtle things and the total sum of these things combined actually create an expensive sound. So, I'm going to first talk about cheap reverbs and the difference between a cheaper reverb and a more expensive reverb. So, in a cheaper reverb, what they do is they take maybe 3 or 4 samples of good long sounding reverbs. One could be a tile room, one could be a wood room, one could be a concert hall, whatever that is. But they'll take a long sample, and algorithmically, in the name of saving memory or storage, they'll take that reverb and they'll shorten it or condense it and then call it small room or bright room or whatever. But it's really actually the same reverb. All they did was they condensed the reverb. Well, guess what happens? The reverb gets thick and the transparency goes away, so it starts to sound tubby and thick. Like fog. If you had fog or a vapor and you spread out the vapor, you can see through it. But if you bring the vapor together, then all of a sudden it gets really thick to where you can't really see through it. So typically a cheaper reverb will do this. They'll take a long sample, shorten it, so their long samples may sound okay, but their shorter sounds don't. That's the difference between an expensive reverb. Well, they'll actually have different algorithms and different room sizes and sounds and give you multiple choices because there's a lot more memory involved and a lot more writing of the algorithms of the reverbs themselves. So with that said, so what do we do then? How does this all play out? Well, if I'm using a cheaper reverb, which I rarely, in fact I don't. And by the way, there's some good plugins out there that sound really great. So, it's for a plugin, there's some decent stuff out there. But what I'll do is I'll start first with a really short room. And I mean like 0.08 seconds, somewhere in there, just under a second. Sorry, 0.08, just under a second. And what I'll do is I'll cut off a bunch of the low end and EQ out some of the pillowy sound that's in the reverb, which is usually around 400 to 500 cycles all the way up to maybe around 1K. Okay, so I'll EQ some of that out, and I'll be very subtle about this because I want a bunch of subtle things combined together to create the total sum of a great sound. Not one box that's going to do everything, but a bunch of little things. So I'll take that and I'll gently put a little bit of it behind my vocal to see how it sits in the mix. I won't play it just alone. I want to see how it fits with the mix and what kind of reverbs I'm using. So then what I'll do is I like taking different kinds of pitch change or doubler pitch change things. Now, if you look in some of the plugins that you have, you'll see that you have access to vocal doublers, pitch change, and. So what I'll do is I'll take a, let's call it pitch change behind the vocal, and I'll take one side that I'll say maybe is 6 cents below the normal tone, 4 to 6 cents below the tone, and one that's maybe 6 to 7 or 8 cents above it. And I'll pan them somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 and 1 or something like that, but it'll look kind of like this, like a V, as you're looking at the way it allows you to pan. Now, we want to have about, maybe 5 milliseconds or something like that, just enough delay on it to where there's no phase relationship with the main lead vocal and having just enough. Now, too much is going to have too much of a doubler effect, and it's going to sound like a delay. So we don't want too much. Just enough to keep the phase relationship from affecting our main vocal. Then I'll take a second doubler or pitch change, and I'll bring it really wide, almost as far wide as you can pan left and right, or a combination. And I'll do the opposite then. This time on this side, instead of it being -6 and +7, I'll go +8 or 9. Now you got to be careful, because if you go +8 on this side and you've already used +8 on this side, you're going to also get that phase relationship. So the cents, or the amount of percent, the semitone cents that you move it, you have to move it far enough away so it doesn't phase. Okay. So let's say if this was 8, I can't do 8 on this side. I've got to do probably 10 or 11, at least 2 away, 10 or 11, maybe 12 and 14. Now that might be a bit wide. That's getting a little too wide, and it's going to start to sound really pitchy. So maybe 4 and 6, and then 8 and 10 or something like that. So, but anyway, experiment with that, because that also has to have a pre-delay or a delay that's set back just a little farther, like maybe 10 milliseconds or 15 milliseconds. And then what I'll do is I'll gently mix those in just enough so it gives me a nice spread, like wallpaper, of my voice sounding like it's coming from everywhere, yet my main body vocal is in the center. This makes the sound really big. Now we do this with a short reverb and then a long reverb, where we want kind of that sound. Then we do it with this panning of these pitch changes, which is awesome. And then we take some delays and we get a time signature of what the delay of the song is. So if the song, let's say, if you're hitting the snares, boom, 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 and they'll dun, 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 dun. That's probably around 270 milliseconds, let's say, something like that, right? Okay, we don't want that exact either because that can also flange, especially if you're on a click where the timing's really exact. We want it just a little bit off. And if you have a stereo delay, you want to do the same thing you just did with your pitch change. So let's say you metered the song and you can hear it where it's bouncing in eighth notes exactly to the rhythm, or quarter notes really, exactly to the rhythm of your song, right? That's it. That's a quarter note. That's eighth notes, excuse me. So if you have these eighth notes, so you've got this eighth note bounce to this thing, then you want to use however much regeneration you want. You don't want it to go. You just want just enough to give some reflection. Now you want to pan again. If it's stereo delay, you want to pan a little bit on the left and a little bit on the right, and you want to make those a little bit different in the amount of delay time. So let's say it's 260 on the left, make the right 275, okay? Then you want a long reverb around the 500 range, exactly double, right? Because it'd be so which is quarter notes. So we'll do the same thing. We'll actually have a quarter note pan. Let's say it's 580 milliseconds on the left and 600 milliseconds on the right, and we want to pan those a little bit farther. We can kind of play with it and see where it sits in the mix, and we want to gently put those behind. Now the longer delays are actually going to be it's going to have about that much regeneration to it. So my suggestion is on the shorter regeneration, the amount of delays that come, you're actually going to have to set longer. So that's going to be probably maybe 15 to 20%, something like that. The longer delays, because they're longer, you want to set half of that. You want to do maybe 10% or 6%, just enough to give you a spatial dimension and a reflection pushing out like this. So you'll find as you gently start to add all these things together, kind of put it in the mix, see how that you subtly just barely kind of hear them and add them one at a time to get a feel for. And you're going to find you're going to have some pretty expensive sounding vocals when you do that. Okay? Thank you.